So being an emergency doctor has changed over the last 10 years since I've been in practice. A lot of that has to do with the change in the healthcare system, access to primary care. But in general, being an emergency doctor is an amazing job. What I love most about it is the ability to be part of a really high-functioning team that can come together at times and to make some pretty amazing things happen.
Welcome to the Specialty Café, the podcast that helps you, medical learners, find your perfect specialty. My name is Cameron Wong, and I'm a current first-year internal medicine resident at the University of Alberta. Before then, I was also a medical student at Queen's University, where Adam is from, my very special guest today. Today, we have a special episode featuring Adam Szulewski. Dr. Adam Szulewski is an emergency medicine physician at the Kingston General Hospital, but is so much more than that. And I'd like to have him introduce himself because I don't think I'm going to do it justice. So yeah, let's dive into this episode. Thank you so much for joining me, Adam.
Excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So do you think for the listeners, you could give a very brief introduction of everything you're doing?
Yeah, I can try my best. Yeah. So first of all, I'm really lucky to be able to wear lots of different hats, and that is, I think, one of the most exciting parts about my job, honestly. But primarily, I'm trained as an emergency doctor, and that's my home. That's my home specialty, where I live, where my community is, where my people are. I also am a trauma team leader and a RACE doctor. RACE is our Rapid Assessment of Critical Event team, also known as Critical Care Response Team in some hospitals. And that's the bulk of my clinical work, those three areas, primarily emergency medicine, though. I'm also a program director of a fellowship program. Hopefully we get a chance to talk about the resuscitation program, which I'm very passionate about, brings me a lot of joy. And I run the KeyLIME Plus podcast, which is a sister podcast to Specialty Café, where we try to get into the minds of doctors and figure out how they think. That's our goal with that. And then recently I've taken on a role at the Royal College where I'm principal strategist for CPD.
Wow. So emergency medicine and also program director. You have like several roles within like emergency medicine, like RACE team and KeyLIME Plus, which is a new role. Is that right?
So KeyLIME, so the KeyLIME podcast has existed for more than a decade. The original version of KeyLIME was an opportunity for physicians to get together and to analyze articles and to get into the meat of articles. And it was put on by a wonderful group of hosts. And I was lucky enough to step into the role about a year and a half ago now. Our KeyLIME Plus is a bit of a different thing than what it used to be. What we try to do on KeyLIME Plus is to get into the stories behind the papers and get to know the medical education leaders out there. And it's more of a storytelling type of podcast. It's been really exciting. You know, I get to cold call people who I think are really cool and interesting. And most of the time they want to speak with me. And so it's an amazing opportunity, really.
What a dream.
Yeah. But I wanted to just make sure, I'd be remiss not to mention that we're building on the success of what was KeyLIME and standing on the shoulders of giants. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we have a lot to get to in this podcast, but I first want to start out by highlighting your job as an emergency medicine physician. But can you tell me, what is it like to be an emergency doctor?
So being an emergency doctor has changed over the last 10 years since I've been in practice. A lot of that has to do with the change in the healthcare system, access to primary care. But in general, being an emergency doctor is an amazing job. What I love most about it is the ability to be part of a really high-functioning team that can come together at times and to make some pretty amazing things happen. Watching that team dynamic go from, social and easygoing and routine to then come together during a critical case where the shift in everybody is very visible and we turn into this performance machine like a Formula One pit crew that can really make a difference in the life of someone who's critically injured or critically ill, I find is one of the most special parts of my job, to be able to be a part of that and to witness it. That's what I love most about what I do.
I never got to work with you directly when I was a Queen's Medical student, but I did get to work with one of your colleagues, Dr. Nikki Rocca. And I do remember exactly what you're describing, attending a code at 1 a.m, standing in the emergency trauma bay. Dr. Rocca was there calmly, like directing everyone, like calling labs, calling orders, and then all the nurses had an exact rule of what to do. Everyone was like functioning as like a well-oiled machine. It was one of the most insane things I've ever seen before.
Well, it's amazing how a group of people can shift, right? And they're trained to shift by necessity, but it is a very cool thing to see, right? And I find it fascinating to think about how doctors make decisions under pressure in those environments, actually, because there's a lot to study there.
You're hinting at your research interest, and I believe your PhD interest as well. You've had extensive research. You've done extensive research into the concept of cognitive overload. Is that it?
Yeah, so my PhD is a cross between educational psychology and cognitive psychology to some degree. I've always been interested in understanding how doctors make decisions under pressure. And I look at it through a cognitive load theory lens. Cognitive load theory is typically a theory of education, actually. It was developed in the 80s in Australia by a guy named John Sweller. And the way he envisioned it was a way to explain the way that learners learn, and a way to then create curricula and to do instructional design in a thoughtful way. And there had been, 30 years of research before I got involved in cognitive load theory. But when I looked at cognitive load theory as I was doing my master's in education, I kind of figured, this is exactly the same kind of stuff that we feel in the resuscitation bay. And that seems like a really good environment to study it. For a lot of reasons. There's time pressure, there's patient pressures, there's a lot going on, and that puts a strain on the person in leading a case, and so that's how I started to think about cognitive load and cognitive load theory. And so we've used that as a backdrop to study doctors, both quantitatively, qualitatively, to get under the hood of how they think.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure a lot of your research is focused on wondering why some people just seem to really click in and lock in under times of duress. And even in these super high pressured situations where there's like tons happening, the decisions are still being made exactly as is, and like they're able to perform at a very high level. Like,
for sure. So some people are incredible at this, but all people who do this they become good at it with practice, right? Nobody walks in there on day one and is good at it, right? That's a fallacy. That's not the way it works, right? There's a lot of practice. There's a lot of self-reflection that goes into to being able to perform during those times. And those people who are interested in it can do some pretty amazing things. And it's always humbling to watch individuals who are good at this, right? And so when I was a junior trainee and I started to look into this, it was pretty inspiring to then interview some of my mentors around how they made decisions during those times, because it's not obvious, right? And sometimes those people have a really hard time actually describing how they make decisions because they're so expert. So getting the opportunity to unpack that with them was a pretty cool thing.
Yeah. I just want to characterize the timeline of this a little bit more, because like it's so amazing that you're able to do this research now. And I think for a lot of the junior learners, people like early on in medical school, it might be really hard to see like how someone could get to where you are right now, Adam, and like having done a master's, having done a PhD, and like being a clinician researcher like yourself. So like, what was like the timeline of events like in you kind of going through that and pursuing that?
Yeah, I mean, none of this was planned, right? And I think just before our episode started today, we talked about the fact that most people who come onto this show will tell you that a lot of this isn't really planned, right? So when I went into emergency medicine, I thought I would be an emergency doctor, which I am, but I get to do all these other things. And I mean, it was just by chance, right? I mean, it's kind of a crazy story, but when I was a fellow in the resuscitation program that I mentioned that I run now, my mentor and now good friend Dan Howes, he gave me a book to read, and it was called Thinking Fast and Slow. And you may have heard about this book. It's written by Daniel Kahneman, who passed away not that long ago. He won the Nobel Prize in economics for some of this work. Essentially, this book talks about how people, not doctors, but other people, make decisions. And there's a couple of different ways to think about how people make decisions. And as I was reading this book, I remember I was on vacation at the time, and I couldn't put the book down because I found it so fascinating, because I was a early PGY4 at this time, and I could see the way that I was thinking was really shifting around that time. This funny thing happens in middle residency where you're no longer a junior resident, you're becoming a senior resident. And if you self-reflect, you can see that your whole thought process is completely changing. And as I was reading this book, I could see in action what Daniel Kahneman was describing. And I thought, like, this is super cool. I have to look into this more. And so it's kind of crazy to think that a book kind of changed the trajectory of how, I looked at my career. But the book in combination with my mentor really did. Mm-hmm. So we did a few studies. We did some eye tracking work, and then used eye tracking video to help interview clinicians after the fact to figure out how they were thinking, to kind of get in their heads. And one thing led to another, and all of a sudden I was doing a master's degree during residency.
Wow. Yeah, and so like you mentioned just before this episode that we're now recording, we recorded an episode with KeyLIME Plus, and I was reflecting on the themes that came up in the Specialty Café episodes I'd recorded previously. One that seemed to recurrently come up is for attendings to suggest to keep an open mind, because their careers had played out so different than they had ever imagined, like yours. And I don't know if I was to ask your PGY1 self if you would be doing what you are doing now, and if it was a book that changed that trajectory for you. And so it's very cool to hear that that was the case. And wow, like it really does seem like you've forged your own routes to explore this interest in cognitive overload and
yeah.
psychology.
I mean, yeah. So my PGY1 self would have said you were crazy. Like, I'm not going into a residency program to, research cognitive load. But, here we are, and I'm so happy that I did. It certainly, the book played a part, but it was also these amazing opportunities that someone who believed in me felt that that I should pursue, and that meant a lot to me. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, once you have some early success, that's motivating, and you want to do more. And that's kind of how it all kind of came to be.
Yeah. Wow. That's very cool. So yeah, that's really great to chat about like your like interests in like cognitive psychology and how you pursued that. I also want to characterize your role as the KeyLIME Plus host, because I think that's something else you're interested in. You're a fellowship director and also interested in medical education. I can see it was like an easy choice for you to get involved in KeyLIME Plus, because I believe the focus is like on characterizing, like you mentioned, kind of advances in medical education and where things are going there. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah. So we, in the intro to KeyLIME Plus, I talk about the fact that I'm someone who is fascinated about learning how doctors think. Mm-hmm. And so that's true in the resuscitation space, but it's also true in medical education. And so I think that the stories behind the papers are incredibly important, because those authors haven't just thought about the data that they've reported. They've also thought about the implications and applications of their work to the real world. And so the KeyLIME Plus is a venue to do that. And frankly, it's a pretty amazing gig, right? I cold call people, I email them, and I say, hey, really like this article, or I heard you were doing this thing. You want to come chat with me about it? And lucky that they do, and we get to have these amazing conversations. And and it's kind of the best continuing medical education that I could have, right? So there's lots of benefits.
No, exactly. And to put a spin on a question that you asked me in the episode we previously recorded, what are some of like the relevant themes for like medical education, more so at like the junior level, that have come up so far in you doing the KeyLIME Plus podcast?
I think mentorship comes up a lot and the importance of that. We talk about the clinical learning space a lot as well. We recently did an episode with Jenna Hall around the importance of clinical learning environments. And that's relevant for everyone, but it's junior learners in particular, because they're living and breathing that clinical learning environment, and it's like 100% of what they do sometimes, right? It feels like, right? Because you're always in the hospital. So those are some of the main themes. So mentorship and the workplace. We talk about assessment and coaching a lot. We talk about the tension sometimes between written feedback and verbal feedback. Something that comes up a lot for junior trainees.
Yeah. What you're hinting at with the differences between written versus verbal feedback, I think is kind of like an oh so common thing that happens, where I can remember like preceptors telling me one thing in person, and then on like the written feedback, it's coming up completely different, like you're mentioning. So yeah, very applicable for junior learners. So we've already talked about like your research side of things. We've talked about your involvement with KeyLIME Plus. I mean, we could probably talk lots more, but next up, like, what is it like being a fellowship director for the resuscitation program at Queen's?
We talked about CPD and this selfish part, selfish part. It's a great benefit of doing these things that I get to learn from all of these amazing human beings, right? That is a big theme. And the Resuscitation Fellowship is kind of the prime example of that, right? So we have people from all over the world who are interested in resuscitation science, who come and challenge me and challenge our faculty to keep us up to date and to make sure that we know what we're talking about. We learn so much from them. It sounds cliche, but it's very true, right? They keep us honest. That's been a big theme in doing the Resuscitation Fellowship. I think I've been involved probably 8 or 9 years now. We've had upwards of close to 50 fellows over that time come through the program. They're all over Canada and all over the world. They're an amazing group of people who have found a niche in resuscitation, and they do work in that. And it's really exciting to watch them take what they've learned and their own interests and create these careers that we could never have dreamt of or designed for them, right? They're doing it all on their own. It's pretty cool to watch.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure like someone has thought the same of you, like the way that you've seemingly taken like these interests in, I guess like for like psychology that you found along the way, and you've taken it to extents that I would say like I would have never thought like someone could take it that far. I'd never heard of kind of the concept of cognitive overload before I heard about the work that you've done. So I'm sure you're very proud of the fellows that have come through the program, certainly.
Yeah, that's why we stay, or for those of us who stay in academia, that's why we do it, right? And it's a pretty motivating thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of rounding out the podcast episode here, I would like to ask you to try your best, I guess, and synthesize just some key things, but with the question of, if you were to talk to your past self, let's say in PGY1 or late medical school, early medical school, now knowing the things you do and now having done the things you've done, what kinds of pieces of advice would you give your past self?
That's a great question. I think I would have reassured myself that I'll figure it out, that whatever path that I choose now is not necessarily the path that I'm always going to be on, and that life takes you in unexpected directions. But if you're an active participant in that, then you can steer those directions into something that's productive and worthwhile. That's one piece of advice, I suppose. Maybe just some reassurance that it's going to be fine and you're going to figure it out. And to be open to being flexible, that your career may take some unexpected turns, and often that's for the best. And that you go into medicine thinking that you're going to be a doctor, and that is true. But and that is that's the main reason we do this. But if you want, there are so many more opportunities, and you can be the director of choosing which of those opportunities you want to pursue and to kind of pursue your passions. And the end can be where you want it to be. It can be here or here or here, and you're going to find fulfillment in whatever it is that you do.
I recorded an episode with Dr. Michael Kwan. He's a general internist at the Ottawa Hospital. I recorded the episode just earlier today, but he talked about a very similar theme in his life. Again, about how he kept an open mind, especially with how things went throughout his career, and he ended up somewhere where he never thought he would have. But I think what you're talking about is a reassurance. Hopefully to many of the junior learners. I know, like, for myself, I want to be very organized. I think, like, in my own clinical work, I try to keep tabs on, like, everything possible and try to be very, very detail oriented. And I think medicine does attract a lot of people who are like that. But despite that, life has unexpected things that come up or offers unexpected opportunities. And I've heard over and over again from specialists like you who are now at, like, the point of their career and they're looking back and unexpected things have come up and they chased it because they wanted to, and it's led them to, like, places where they never thought they would have, and they're thriving like you are. It appears to be. So that's a really, really great piece of advice for sure. And then, kind of broadening this up, this is a very similar question, but more so directed at medical learners. It's also the last question that I ask on every single podcast episode. What's a general piece of advice you would give to junior medical learners who are just starting their career in medicine? And it has to be different than keeping an open mind.
I'll see. I don't know if everyone's going to agree with this. This is just my opinion, okay? There is this rhetoric these days where we need to say no to things, right? Because we're being asked a lot, and a lot is being asked of us all the time. And I think there is space for that, and I think that's important. But I think you have to know where you are in your career trajectory and decide when the right time to say no is, and when the right time to say yes is, even if it makes you a little uncomfortable. So, of course, you need to make sure that you're not, that there aren't significant consequences to your own health and to your own mental well-being. And you need to make sure you have time for that and for the people you care about. But sometimes it's okay to push yourself and to say yes to things where you're not comfortable, because you may think you know where that path may lead you, but you actually have no idea. Because those yes opportunities are times when other opportunities come up. Mm-hmm. And that's at all levels. Can I give you one specific example?
Of course.
A couple of months ago, I got asked to give a talk at Queen's Homecoming. I'd done this TED talk or TED style talk last couple of years ago. And that was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Okay. And I had to memorize 20 minutes or 7.5 pages of single-spaced, essentially an essay, right, of a speech. I ended up taking 5 days off of clinical work in order to memorize this. You couldn't have notes. It was a live audience, lots of pressure, right? So I rearranged my schedule to make this happen. And when it was done, I said, I'm never doing that again, right? And then I got asked to do this Queen's Homecoming event, and they said, can you just do that thing that you did again? And my first reaction was absolutely not. It's not happening, right? And then I thought about it some more. I thought, okay, well, what if I can bring my notes with me? Okay. And they said, yeah, sure, bring your notes. And so I begrudgingly accepted. And I went to this event. And I invited my wife and my 3 young kids, to this thing. And there were alumni from the last half century. So there was someone from Meds 1970 there, and all the way up through the years. And it was a really cool thing. It was special because my kids had never seen me speak in front of a big audience before. And so they got to do that. And they got to see this different part of their dad that wasn't something that they really had any insight into. So there was a huge amount of benefit from a family perspective that I would not have expected. And then there's other stuff. Like I had some amazing conversations with people afterwards. And of course, after that event, kind of it leads to other invitations, which, that have only happened because of that event. But the most special thing is this thing that my kids got to see. And I think that kind of motivated them in a different way to kind of see their dad in a different light. And I thought that was a really special thing, that if I had said no to this opportunity because I didn't want to do it, because I was already very busy, wouldn't have happened. And I couldn't have expected or anticipated that.
Yeah.
And it's just one example, but I think it's okay to say yes, even if it makes you a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So there's my piece of advice. It's a long-winded piece of advice.
Very, very important piece of advice. Yeah. I think it goes without saying, probably a lot of the most important things that happen in people's lives happen when they're just a little bit uncomfortable, but the right amounts. And saying yes, as you mentioned. But thank you so much for this extremely insightful episode, Dr. Szulewski, Adam. And I'm really glad that I got the chance to characterize all the different types of hats that you wear as an emergency physician, a fellowship director, a podcast host, a researcher, a father. And you absolutely had some very, very excellent piece of advice that I hope all the junior learners listening to this podcast will enjoy. Thank you very much for the chance to talk.
That was a lot of fun. Appreciate the invitation.
Of course. Thank you very much. Thanks so much for tuning into this very special episode with Dr. Adam Szulewski. If you are a resident doctor listening to this podcast, remember to sign up with the Royal College as a resident affiliate. It is free and there's lots of benefits. But thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Cameron Wong, one of the hosts of the Specialty Café podcast, and I'm so glad that you joined for today and tune in for next time.